podcast for potential development by and with Uli Vogel. Welcome everyone, dear listeners, to our podcast for today's episode, which is connected with a very interesting person. I am very pleased that Nina Riedel from our community, Nina Riedel, an expert in mental health in the workplace, is with us today. Hello, dear Nina.
Hello, dear Uli. Yes, thank you very much for the invitation. I'm really looking forward to our conversation today with you.
Yes, the feeling is mutual. And I'll just get started by sharing a few things about you. We've known each other for over a year now and have already done quite a few things together, but you've really accomplished so much in your life. You are primarily a business psychologist, but also with additional qualifications such as company health manager, then also personnel and business coach, psychological consultant. That's quite a lot, what you've accumulated there already. Yes, now there are more certificates here and so on. So, to me, that shows you're multi-interested, very inquisitive, and then you just got started. Often, actually almost always in consulting. I see a position as a personnel officer once, but also some famous names you've checked out. Corn Ferry as an internship, so to speak. You also started working freelance quite early on. Then I see Hayes here, which is very well known in the HR consulting field. You were there for quite some time. Accenture not so long, maybe you didn't like the huge corporation. Let's take a look right away at the Morgan Phillips Group. You were there too. The name rings a bell, but I don't really know them well. And you were at SHL as well. That's basically the pioneer of psychometric assessments with the OPQ. I don't even know when they started the Occupational Personality Questionnaire, probably in the 1960s. And then you took parental leave, and now you're an entrepreneur. You really took off with Nina Riedel Consulting. And now I'm really curious to see how we'll approach things here. I've outlined 3 points or snippets or sections for us, so our listeners know what to expect. First point, clearly, Nina, we want to get to know you. The essence of your journey already contains so much. And there are always reasons for that, so that's our first part. In the second part, I really want to dig into your mission a bit, of course with your values, or as people say in modern terms, your target vision. You have an interesting background, but you focus specifically on mental health in the workplace. And I think that's a huge topic, one I've already dedicated an episode or two to. We'll get right into it and maybe also consider, okay, what does that have to do with anything? In some areas, with profiling values, or how can you make use of that as well? And that leads as a bridge to the third point we've picked out here. You've been our brand ambassador for a while now, which we're really happy about, and we want to dive into how that came about. Tell us a bit about what we associate with that term. And maybe before I ask you the first question, I think it's worth mentioning, more than worth mentioning, I think it's absolutely fantastic how you've managed, in such a short time on LinkedIn, to already have over 9,000 followers. That was a little while ago, so maybe you even have more by now. And your social media activity is really great. I admire it. The content is deep, but still presented in a way that's really accessible. So, that might also tie in a bit with the topic of brand ambassador. Let's start with the key points of your journey. So you actually went into business psychology, which was quite some time ago now. Break time equals 0.5s/. What made you choose that, Nina?
That's true, yeah. Good question. First of all, thank you for the lovely introduction. Actually, there have already been quite a few stops along my professional path. And before business psychology, I had already tried out a few other things. Originally, I always wanted to become a lawyer. I was totally fascinated by that profession. And I actually studied business laws in accounting and taxation. But somehow, it just didn't really click for me. And then I discovered business psychology at Hochschule Fresenius and thought, yes, that's it, that's what I want to do. And yeah, that's how it happened. And then, quite naturally, my focus became personnel and organizational psychology, which, as you can see, runs like a common thread through my career.
Yeah, exactly. I actually didn't know about the law thing at the beginning. My oldest son is studying law, and he's also writing his exams this year. That was never an option for me. I always found it so dry. I actually had it partly in my studies too, because I did political science with economics and public law. But you just mentioned the name Fresenius, and for me, that's always stood for, I think they have a good reputation. I've never had any direct experience myself, but I've heard a lot indirectly that it's practice-oriented but still of high quality. And that's where you got involved then. And that's basically the academic foundation. But what I forgot to mention earlier, and maybe you can weave that in a bit as we go through the key points of your journey, is that you also teach as a lecturer, so you're already giving something back to society at such a young age. And maybe that's also an important point, where our listeners might want to know, yeah, how does she do it all? Why does she do it? But also, how does she manage it? I find it incredibly productive, how many different areas you're active in. But maybe you could briefly describe, after your studies, why you chose those particular stations and what you took away from them, what ultimately led you to become self-employed.
Yes, of course. So, as you already mentioned at the beginning, I was already working as a freelancer during my studies. And even then, I was already designing my first sales trainings, reviewing application documents, and creating interview guides for job interviews, for example. And I really enjoyed that a lot. And somehow, I always had it in the back of my mind that I wanted to go back to that one day. But before that, I tried my hand in the business world and worked in medium-sized companies, but also at large corporations, at big companies. And yes, as you can see from my career path, and as you got to know me, I like that. Quick decisions. So I don't like to waste time on something if I notice I'm not getting anywhere with it. And that's why I've always tried things out. After my studies, I first worked as an HR officer, which gave me an overview of the different areas within the HR department. And I really enjoyed recruiting. And that's how I ended up moving to Hayes. Honestly, it was a great working relationship back then at Adastra in IT consulting. Somehow, I've always been involved with IT and consulting as well. Been involved. That's kind of my world. But I was missing a bit of pace there, the speed and challenge. And that's exactly what I found at Hayes. I actually stayed there for quite a while, at least for my standards. That was also a great educational time. I worked in recruiting there, but also in sales. And in the end, I worked in strategic key account management, looking after a major client from the banking sector, also with an IT focus. Exactly. And yeah, as I kept getting promoted there, overcoming my challenges and learning a lot, I started thinking, all right, what's next? Then there was the opportunity to move into internal recruiting, to switch to recruiting at Accenture. You mentioned that as well, and Accenture really is a great employer, so I can highly recommend it, especially when it comes to company culture and how recruiting is done there. They really pay a lot of attention to personal fit and drive, whether the person fits into the organization. For me, though, the playground within the corporation was just too small, as you can imagine. So the area of impact just wasn't there. Big enough. And I also left on good terms. I'm still part of the alumni network, and I always say the probation period is there for both sides. It used to be said that you shouldn't leave during the probation period. I don't buy into that. It always depends on the individual situation.
Yeah, that's totally outdated. I think so too. So, you really have to leave during the probation period if you don't see the right fit. Because if you stay longer, people will rightly ask you the question, but why didn't you use that time? You mentioned Hayes, and from what I see, they're very sales-oriented. And you also worked in that area. And for me, that's also an incredibly good preparation for self-employment because, well, I work with a lot of self-employed people, and marketing and selling your services is really a challenge. And with you, I get the sense that, first of all, you have experience. And secondly, you do it in such a nice, calm way. So, how do you see sales? Maybe we can just do a little side note here, since it's part of your background and, of course, part of your current job as well.
Gladly. That was, of course, a really good preparation for self-employment as well. And yes, I would also say that I'm not one of those pushy salespeople. A lot of people have a certain image in their heads when it comes to people in sales. And my approach to sales is consultative selling. So I never went to clients with a bag of tricks and said, "Here you go." Instead, I always started the conversation with the clients and tried to find out where the shoe pinches, so to speak. And how can I help with my service, with my advice, just like I did at Morgan Phillips? How can I be of assistance? And there was this one time, a nice little anecdote, maybe for this moment, when I was completely taken aback because I was visiting a client in the Ruhr area. It was our first meeting. And at the end, he said he thought it was really great and found me very likable. And I was the first person who had ever come to see him without a presentation. And I just shook my head and laughed because nobody wants to sit through a sales pitch right at the start. For me, it's really about getting to know their needs, understanding how the company is set up, what makes them tick, and how I can then provide tailored support.
Yeah, that's a really important point. I totally agree with you there. I'm a fan of Neil Rackham, who basically founded consultative selling. That was quite a while ago, wasn't it? And he also developed the spin method. It's awful when people come in and say, "Here, let me show you these slides. I want to show you everything we can do." Yeah, I mean, the potential customer doesn't want to waste their time, they want you to talk about and figure out where the shoe pinches, so to speak. And I think that's really a top achievement in sales. As a salesperson, figuring out everything about the situation, the problems, the implications, and then the actual needs, so you can come up with a tailored, possible solution. And that's also something really satisfying, in my opinion. So, I'm glad that you see sales the same way. And what we have isn't a consumer good. And neither are you. It's actually a really complex, sometimes even a service that truly needs to be tailored. And now we've kind of gone off track a bit, but you mentioned the Morgan Phillips Group, SHL. There was something else at the end, but then parental leave came along. And you also have an entrepreneur as a husband, as you told me. So you two are really entrepreneurial, and then you started out, and now I'm curious, how did you decide on your direction? How did you set yourself up? And the second point is your mission, your values, your target vision. You've been able to pack a lot into your backpack of experience, but then you have to somehow organize and focus it. So that, at the end of the day, you don't end up with a jack-of-all-trades approach, even if you don't open it right away, it's still focused. And I'd be interested in your thoughts on that, and also how you developed it. How you did it, interest me.
Very good question. Yeah, focus is a bit of a thing for me. I have to chuckle because I'm interested in so many things. I've done a lot, and I can do a lot. And focus has really occupied me during my first year of self-employment. And for me, the focus topic is simply mental health in the workplace. That's the topic closest to my heart, because my vision is a better and healthier working world for us and for future generations. I truly believe in that. And the current numbers, health reports are regularly published by various health insurance companies, show just how dramatic the situation is. And in the end, it's not just a feel-good topic, as I always say. It's about money. It costs the economy billions. And that came. As background, I think I already told you about this before. I faced mental health challenges during the COVID pandemic and was then laid off. Unfortunately, that was a bit awkward to handle. And then, during my pregnancy and parental leave, I decided to intentionally take a break from work. Of course, I wasn't completely inactive. I mean, as a parent, you always have lots to do, but I also always need some intellectual stimulation, so I continued my education and prepared for self-employment. And during the COVID pandemic, I took part in a wall circle, working out loud. That's a kind of training program. You might know it from
LinkedIn.
Exactly. And that's where the idea came up to advise companies on mental health. And last year, I put that into action and took the leap into self-employment. And now I can't imagine it any other way.
Yeah, that's how it is for a lot of people. That's how it was for me too. For me, it's already been 16 years. Now, you've done a great job. You've already really clearly articulated your target vision, really nailed it. Maybe if we dig a little deeper and ask, how can a company actually picture the consulting, or a possible consulting measure, or a project? Or whatever you want to call it, with Nina Riedel. So, what happens when you've convinced them that the topic is important, that there are points of connection for this company, and the trust has been established? In other words, the sales work has been done well. How do you approach it so our listeners can get a bit of a feel for it? How does Nina Riedel get involved there, and in what way does she move things forward?
Well, of course, that depends. My favorite consultant phrase, it depends. Yes, of course, it depends on the individual situation of the company. So first we go into analysis and take stock of the current situation. How is the company positioned when it comes to workplace health management? Assuming a WHM already exists, how is it set up? Of course, there are companies that don't have this yet.
Workplace health management, for those who aren't familiar with the acronym yet. Exactly.
Exactly, yes. And then I look at whether it might make sense to use the profiling values method. With the balance report, we also have a great way to see how balanced the employees currently are and where we can take action. As a starting point, I also find the Y questionnaire, or workability index, very helpful. So, how capable of working are the employees? And of course, ultimately, the psychological risk assessment, which has actually been legally required since 2013. For companies, but in reality, only about 60% of companies are currently carrying this out. Yes, and then I look at the data to see where the problem lies and which measures would be helpful. Of course, you can run workshops, set up sessions on the topic of mental health. I also think it's really important to focus on managers as role models and multipliers. I always like to compare it to parenting. If we tell our kids something but behave differently ourselves, then they won't act the way we say they should.
And you even undermine your own authority.
Exactly.
You.
Become untrustworthy.
That's right, yeah. True.
Exactly. Yeah, that's basically it in a nutshell.
Yeah, there are of course different starting points, like you said. And then, of course, every client and every company is unique as well. But I think managers, in particular, are extremely important as a kind of transmission belt here. But also, just like that, Laying the groundwork. I also remember, it's been quite a few years now, when we last did the psychological risk assessment at our place. Do you also have, so to speak, an entry-level toolkit for something like this, so that if a client says, "Oh, we're among the 40% who haven't done this yet," are you someone who handles that as well, or do you maybe pass it on to others? That's already an important starting point, having some analytics here as well.
Absolutely, yes, a very, very important starting point. I do it myself. So I also completed further training as a corporate health manager, and as an occupational psychologist, I can handle this myself as well.
Very good. It's important for me too, because this topic comes up with me quite often. And we don't do this basic work and analytics ourselves. Of course, it works with profiling values. It's one way to take a closer look at individuals and later aggregate data sets. But I assume it's also a bigger investment if you're doing a psychological risk assessment, let's say, for a company with 100 employees. It's important to get data points from everyone, or at least as many people as possible. And not yet a deep analysis of each individual with possible resulting measures. Rather, it's more of a meta starting point in the sense of an overall view, right?
Yes, exactly. That's true, that's a good point, because in fact, when it comes to sick days, most of the costs are actually caused by just a few employees.
Yeah.
And that's really a good point. And in that case, the investment is definitely worth it. To take a closer look at where the challenges lie and how employees can be optimally supported and deployed.
I'm also seeing more and more reports and statistics on this topic. Over the last 10, 15, sometimes even 20 years. And it's not just that, this might be important for listeners here as well. It's not just that the number of cases where people are off sick due to mental health issues is increasing, but especially that the number of days in this area is going up as well. And when you say, now with the focus on just a few, so to speak, then on the one hand you can address things much more specifically, but on the other hand, you also see that we need to make sure that, generally speaking, we change the conditions across the board so that it doesn't just drag down a few individuals, to put it bluntly.
Exactly.
And that actually brings me right to the connection here with the brand ambassador. So, our third part here, you've already mentioned where you can use profiling values, the balance report, when someone needs deeper support. But at the beginning, I'd like to just briefly outline how we met, and then hear from your perspective how things have developed since then. I think it was in February of last year, because that's when we had the idea to strengthen our sales a bit externally, not just doing it ourselves. So we started looking for people. And you were there as well, and interested. I was really impressed by your background and also by our first conversation. But it didn't work out at the time because I think our model wasn't set up optimally either, and it would have required quite a lot of initial investment from you. And you were probably still in the process of figuring out your own focus as well. But then, I think, about half a year later, we got back in touch and really got down to business. Am I describing that correctly, or is there anything you'd like to add, how you felt about it and how it came across to you?
Yeah, I feel the same way. I think you summed it up really well. The values definitely matched, but the topic just wasn't the right fit yet. And like you said, I was still in the process of figuring things out, which brings us back to my favorite topic, focus. And at that point, I was still working on finding my focus. But I think it's great that our paths crossed again, because it just worked out based on our shared values.
Yeah, that's the point, and maybe it's important that we emphasize that again. You put it nicely just now, somehow, yeah, our value antenna's connected, but the content, somehow, no, that just wasn't quite there yet. But then you can really see that values have a certain power, you just stuck in my mind. And then, when you look at how you're also present on social media, let's say, maybe we'll say 2 or 3 more sentences about that in a moment, then. You've always been set up in such a way that there are these touch points every now and then, so yeah, you really do stay on someone's mind. And then at some point you say to yourself, man, I really need to talk to Nina again. And then you also started the training. Well, you're a professional in the field. I may have been your tutor, but I didn't have to do much. Of course, we exchanged ideas from time to time. You really dove into our learning journey in a very self-taught way. How did that go for you? And then you took your first steps, and by now you're actually quite experienced. How was it for you? How did you find our training?
Very good. Honestly, I thought everything in the academy was really well put together, especially the videos. I like that you get straight to the point and don't beat around the bush too much. I'm not a fan of it when you're learning online and it just drags on and not very focused. And that's what I especially liked, and I've now also submitted my practical exam. But as you rightly said, I basically learned it on the job and have already used it in several career coaching sessions, because I often have clients who come to coaching and say they're missing a sense of purpose at work, and they want to reorient themselves to take another look. Yeah, where am I actually at, and where do I want to go from here? That's something a lot of people are dealing with, and profiling values is really a great tool to have as a starting point. And interestingly, it's people of all ages. So I have clients who are just out of university, just starting their careers, or then people in middle age, like my age group, but also those around 50 who say they want to take another look at things.
And
I think that's the case for a lot of people, because they didn't really look at their values or where they wanted to make a contribution when they started their careers in society.
yeah, and maybe it was often those generations too, where, there was really an employer's market, and you just had to make sure you got in somewhere. And then you didn't really reflect on things or take a closer look at them. And then working life goes on for years and decades, and it's nice when you say that you can help support things like reorientation or reflection at that stage too, right? And we kept in touch like that. And I also followed you on social media, and then we talked about whether we could somehow help each other out, because I really think your approach is excellent. And the values you stand for. Yeah, and then at some point, I don't even remember exactly how, we landed on the term brand ambassador. And I think you really get it when it comes to values, just like I see it too. So, there's also that other term, influencer. We dismissed that right away. That's not what it's about. Instead, I think, at least from my perspective, it's a bit more about raising awareness. But I'm also interested in your opinion, how you see this role as a brand ambassador for us, and what it means to you.
I see it exactly the same way you do. Honestly, I don't think influencer fits us or our values either. And yes, first of all, thank you so much for the lovely feedback. That makes me really happy. Yeah, it just worked out perfectly. And I'm really glad that that I get to represent profiling values on LinkedIn, at least to some extent. And I share posts, for example, about how profiling values can be used. I provide clarification. So if I notice there's a post that fits the topic well, I use it to explain what it actually means. Because for many people who haven't had any experience with psychometric tools, it can seem a bit like looking into a crystal ball or some kind of hocus pocus. And I think, just like in the field of mental health, raising awareness is also a really important point here. And yes, that's how I see my role. And of course, I also like to use it with clients and recommend it within my network. Yeah,
You've just brought up a great point, and I'd even say an important one. These are kind of the barriers that people have in their minds or even their hearts when it comes to psychometric methods. And I've been dealing with this for 25 years now, and I've noticed that here in Germany, we're a bit unique in that regard. The barriers are higher here than elsewhere. I had the chance to work internationally very early on, and was able to do a lot of work abroad. And now I'm focusing on that again. I've now also delivered our entire training in English and am currently targeting the consultant and HR market abroad. And you notice that it's seen as much more normal there, that these are simply aids, just tools. There's no big fear or panic about it, people just get on with it. So, in that sense, if you've managed to apply psychometric methods effectively with a client in Germany, you can probably do it abroad as well. Cracking the tougher nut was definitely here. But I think we have some overlap here, not just in our personal values, but to maybe bring it back around again. To the mission, you just mentioned a healthier working world. I talk about a more humane working world, and I think both of us are convinced that if these two criteria are brought to the forefront, it will also become a more successful and, above all, a more satisfying environment for people. And as Hartmann once put it so nicely, companies exist for people, not the other way around, not people for the companies. And I think that's something we both serve. This even greater mission. What do you think about that?
Exactly. I see it the same way too. Hand in hand. And just to get to the point about the acceptance of these tools in Germany, to come back to that, in the UK, for example, it's much more widely recognized. I think that here in Germany, in the truest sense of the word, we're leaving potential lying on the street.
Yes, and that continues, for example, with the fact that the integration of women into the workforce performance of an economy is also lower. Then we're leaving potential on the table. But we don't want to bash anyone. Instead, we're saying, folks, we're here to inform. We have the tools, and we're looking to move things forward. Nina, I think that was a nice way to wrap things up from my perspective. And if you're good with it, I'd say let's call it a day here. We can always look for another good opportunity to see if we can dive deeper into something. It really was a very, very nice conversation. And thank you so much for investing your valuable time. Nina. Much appreciated.
Thank you as well, Uli. Yeah, I'd be happy if we could pick this up again. Maybe we can dig a bit deeper into some specific topics next time.
Great, thanks so much. See you soon. Take care.
See you then.
Yeah, bye. Bye.